Hello students, in this video we will study about the epithelium tissue, which is one of the types of tissues found in the body. Now this is a histology chapter and it is session 51 consisting of epithelial tissue. Now what is a tissue? Let us see the definition first. Tissue refers to a group of structurally similar cells performing similar functions. Now that is a tissue. Tissue refers to group of cells, and we say that all the cells of a tissue have a common origin, common function and common structure. So they have same shape, size, etc., and all together perform a similar function. So that constitute a tissue. So it is the next level after cells in a body organization. And in a body, we normally find four types of tissues. So they are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscular tissue, and nervous tissue. So we will study about the different types of tissues in different classes. So in this class we are going to study the epithelial tissue. Now epithelial tissue, it shows some characters. Okay, so one of the important character of epithelial tissue is it mainly covers the outer and inner layer of different organs of our body. So we have so many organs inside the body, and each and every organ is covered by a layer, and that layer is normally made up of epithelial tissue. And organs also have the inner layer. For example, the alimentary canal, so it has inner layer, right? So like that, the organs have inner cavity which is covered by a layer, and that is also made up of epithelial tissue. And overall our body is covered by skin, which is also an example of epithelium tissue. Now when it comes to the shape and size, remember, the epithelial tissue exists in different shape and different sizes. It depends upon in which organ it is situated and which function it is doing. So depending on that, we can expect different shapes and different sizes of the epithelial tissue. Now polarity. So this is one of the important characters where the epithelial cells have a definite polarity. So one end of the cells is attached to the basal membrane, and another one is free, which we can call it as apical. So there is a surface which is free, and there is another surface which is attached to the basement membrane, and the lateral side is normally found attached with the neighboring epithelial cell. So like this, each and every epithelial cell has a different polarity. And then another important character of epithelium tissue is the presence of basement membrane. So all the epithelial cells are actually situated on a mixture of glycoproteins and glycogen. And this glycoproteins and collagen, this mixture of glycoproteins and collagen forms like a cementing substance on which the cells are situated, and this basement membrane forms an attachment site for the epithelial cells and epithelium tissue in general. Okay, and that is a very important character of epithelial tissue. Then there exist cell-to-cell junctions. Now, between the neighboring cells of the epithelial tissue, we find some structures which we can call them as junctions. So, what are those junctions? So, regarding cell-to-cell junctions, before we study the cell-to-cell junctions, one point we have to remember, that is, in epithelial tissue, the cells are closely arranged. So there is no substance in between the cells. That means no intercellular material to separate the cells of the epithelial tissues. That means one cell of the epithelial tissue is literally in physical contact with the neighboring cell. So therefore, the junctions exist between the neighboring cells, and we find three types of junctions. They are tight junctions, gap junctions, and anchoring junctions. So these three types of junctions we can expect in the epithelial tissue. Now let us study what are those different kinds of junctions that exist between the cells. First one is tight junctions. Now, when two adjacent epithelial cells form a tight junction, there is no extracellular space between them, and the movement of substances through the extracellular space between the cells is blocked. And this enables the epithelia to act as a selective barrier. So, as we can understand, the tight junctions, okay, they hold the neighboring cells so tight together that there is no space for the extracellular material. Okay, and because of this, the epithelium becomes a selective barrier. And for example, the materials which can enter into the organ, it has to pass through the epithelial tissue. And here, because of the presence of such tight junctions, the epithelial tissue itself behaves like a selective barrier, allowing some kind of material to pass through and other kinds of material to other kind of material not to pass through the epithelial tissue. So like this, the presence of tight junctions results in the epithelial tissue becoming a selective barrier. Then we find gap junctions. Okay, so the gap junctions, they form an intercellular passageway between the membranes of adjacent cells to facilitate the movement of small molecules and ions between the cytoplasm of adjacent cells. So as the name suggests, these are the gap junctions with a gap, and it allows the movement of molecules between the neighboring cells. And in some kind of organs and tissues, it becomes necessary for the movement of some molecules, electrical and metabolic coupling cells. The cells which um, show this kind of function. So there is a need for movement of molecules between the cells, and that is possible because of these gap junctions. And the third kind of junctions we find between the cells of epithelium tissue is anchoring junction. So it includes several types of cell junctions that help stabilize epithelial tissues. And the name suggests the function itself. So anchoring, they hold the cells together very tightly, and that stabilizes the epithelial tissue, say shape, size, shape and position, etc. Anchoring junctions are commonly on the lateral and basal surfaces of the cells, where they provide strong and flexible connections. Now you can imagine, in epithelial tissue, there is no intracellular uh, there is no intercellular substance between the cells, and as a tissue, it must maintain the integrity, and that is possible by these anchoring junctions. Now there are three types of anchoring junctions called desmosomes, hemidesmosomes, and adherents. And now let us move on to the study of types of epithelium tissues. Now basically we can identify two types of epithelial tissues, epithelial cells or kinds of tissues. One is covering or lining, and another one is glandular. So the name itself tells you the first kind is covering or lining. The epithelial tissue which covers different organs, or the inner or outer lining of different organs or parts of the body, they can be considered under this heading, covering or lining. Now, the covering or lining type of epithelium tissue is again divided depending upon the shape and size of the cells. So the first one is simple epithelium. It is made up of single layer of identical cells which are usually found on secretory or absorptive surfaces. So the name implies a single layer of epithelial cells. If the tissue is made up of only one layer of epithelial cells, then that can be considered as simple epithelium. Now this simple epithelium is again subdivided into three types. So they are simple squamous epithelium, simple cuboidal epithelium, and simple columnar epithelium. Now here in this diagram, you can see this one. So this picture represents the simple squamous epithelium, and here this one represents the simple cuboidal, and this one represents the simple columnar. Now you can see the difference between the shape and size of the cells. In simple squamous, the cells are flat, okay, and the middle part of the cell is normally bulged, and when in the borders the cells become narrower. So this is the shape of cells. Okay, in sections the squamous cells actually appear like spindle shaped. Okay, but we can simply consider them as flat cells. And cuboidal, as the name suggests, the shape of the cell is cube-like. Okay, and the third one is columnar. Here the cells are tall. Okay, columnar, pillar-like. So they are tall, and that represents the columnar. Now, the squamous epithelium is normally the one which is found as a covering, as a lining of organs, whereas cuboidal is more functional. Okay, squamous epithelium's main function is only to form a layer or protection, whereas the cuboidal and columnar cells are found in secretory or absorptive surfaces. For example, you find cuboidal cells in glands. Of course, glands are different kinds of tissues, but here we are classifying based on the shape. Therefore, the single layer of cuboidal cells, some glands are there which secrete, and columnar cells are normally found in absorptive surfaces. For example, the uh, innermost layer of the intestine. Okay, so that is made up of columnar epithelium. So like this, the simple epithelium is again divided into squamous epithelium, simple squamous epithelium, simple cuboidal epithelium, and simple columnar epithelium, mainly based on the shape of the cells. And the second type under the covering or lining type of epithelial tissue is stratified epithelium. Now the cells exist in many layers. Okay, so epithelial tissue, which is made up of multi-layered structure, that is called multi-layered cells, that is called stratified epithelium. In simple, we find only one layer of epithelial cells, and in stratified epithelium we find many layers of epithelial cells. And this is again subdivided into stratified squamous, stratified cuboidal, and stratified columnar. For example, the stratified squamous is again divided into keratinized and non-keratinized. For example, the skin, which is the best example, the outer layer of skin is made up of keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. Now, the keratinization results in the death of the outermost layer of the cells, and the non-keratinized type of tissue is normally found on the inner lining of, on the lining of organs which are present inside the body. And stratified cuboidal and stratified columnar epithelium cells are also found in different parts of the body. So I think it's very easy to understand, because stratified refers to the many layers and cuboidal refers to the shape of cells, and columnar, the cells are tall and pillar like. Okay, so these are the three types of uh, epithelium tissues found under stratified category. Then another important main category of epithelial tissue is glandular epithelium. As the name suggests, the glands, glands are the structures which secrete some substances, and those glands are made up of epithelial tissue, and that is considered as glandular epithelium. Now remember, the glandular epithelium is mainly concerned with the function of secretion, but when it comes to the shape, the glandular epithelium may be a cuboidal epithelium or columnar epithelium. Okay. Now, as far as glands are concerned, we find two kinds of glands in the body: the endocrine glands and exocrine glands. Now, what are endocrine glands? Endocrine glands are the ductless glands which mainly secrete hormones directly into the blood stream. Now, example of the endocrine glands like pituitary gland, thyroid gland, pancreas gland, adrenal gland, etc. Now, if you study the histology of endocrine glands, you will find that the structure of these glands is mainly made up of different types of epithelial cells which secrete the respective hormone. For example, pituitary gland cells secrete pituitary hormones like FSH, LH, ACTH, etc. And the follicle cells of the thyroid gland, they secrete the T3 and T4 hormone, thyroxine hormones. Then the cells found in the pancreas, like alpha cells, beta cells, they produce the glucagon and insulin hormone respectively. So here in the glandular epithelium, the cells are mainly secretory in function. Either they secrete a hormone, as in case of endocrine gland, or some other substances, as in case of exocrine gland. Now, what are exocrine glands? Now, exocrine glands are the glands which have their own duct. So release their contents into a duct, and that duct will take the secretion to a respective, the target place. For example, mucus glands which secrete mucus. Mucus glands are present in many parts of our body, like our respiratory tract has mucus gland, the alimentary canal has mucus glands, the reproductive tract, it also has mucus gland. So it secretes mucus which keeps the surface moist, and many other functions are done by mucus. Now, sweat glands which are found on the skin, they produce sweat. Okay, and saliva which is produced by salivary glands is also a product of exocrine gland. And digestive glands like pancreatic juice, which is produced by the exocrine part of the pancreas. Okay, and the intestinal glands which are present in the intestine, which secrete intestinal juice, and then the gastric glands which produce the gastric juice. So these are all example of digestive glands. So exocrine glands secrete normally the enzymes and other substances like mucus, sweat, saliva, etc. So they are also example of glandular epithelium. Now let us move on to the understanding. Let us move on to understanding functions of the epithelial tissue. So as I already mentioned, epithelial tissue is mainly the covering tissue, and therefore its main function is protection of the organ or the whole body from physical, chemical, and biological wear and tear. So the main function, the important function of epithelial tissue is protection, okay? Because it forms a layer on the whole body in the form of skin, or in the form of layers on the organs, the important organs like kidney, liver, pancreas, heart, etc. All of them have a covering. Okay, so they are protected from outer environmental influences or chemicals or materials by these epithelial tissues. And epithelial tissues act as gatekeepers of the body, controlling permeability and allowing selective transfer of materials across the physical barrier. And as in case of glandular epithelium, the epithelial cells are very important when it comes to the secretion of hormones and the enzymes. I mean, the exocrine and endocrine secretions are the result of epithelial tissues. And epithelial of small intestine releases digestive enzymes, which I already mentioned. Cells lining the respiratory tract secrete mucus that traps incoming microorganisms and particles. So the respiratory tract has mucous membrane, and mucus which is secreted by the mucous membrane. Uh, it has many functions, like it moistens the air, and it mainly traps the dust and other microorganisms that enter into your respiratory tract. So a glandular epithelium contains many secretory cells. So these are some of the important functions of epithelial tissue. Okay, now that's about the epithelium tissue, and I suggest the students to read the materials either on the net or by referring any textbook to understand the various functions of the epithelial tissue, and the types of epithelium tissues and where they exist, etc. So that's about the epithelium tissue, and in our next class we'll continue with the study of another type of tissue. Okay, thank you.